Thank you for inviting me to speak. My disclosures, I have lung cancer. Also, I've never participated in a clinical trial for various reasons, but I am alive because other people have. I got involved in lung cancer advocacy in 2001 after losing both my mom and dad and other loved ones to lung cancer. At the time, I could count on one hand the number of clinical trials in lung cancer, and as you can see, there weren't many treatment options. Fast forward to 2009 when I was diagnosed with lung cancer, and you see that things weren't much better. In fact, just 10 years ago, EGFR was the only targetable mutation, and there wasn't even a therapy approved for first line treatment. Without a doubt, 2020 was a challenging year for all of us, but it was a banner year for approvals in the treatment of lung cancer. 11 new treatment approaches were approved for lung cancer by the FDA. That has never been seen in the history of oncology for any cancer. But with so many new and promising treatments in the pipeline, the need for clinical trials to test them for safety and efficacy has never been greater. However, as the field of genomics rapidly progresses, clinical trials have become increasingly complex with more and more eligibility criteria, which has led to trials becoming more and more homogeneous. Think about it. The narrower the eligibility criteria, the more similar the participants will be, which only results in data that won't be applicable to most people with lung cancer who will be using the treatments in the real world. There has been some important work recently on the difference it can make when inclusion criteria are expanded. This 2019 study showed that broadening the eligibility criteria to include the three traditional exclusion criteria, no brain metastasis, standard kidney function measures, and no other cancers, would actually double the number of patients available to participate in clinical trials. But the number one restrictive eligibility criteria is health disparities. Given the deep-rooted disparities that exist, we can use the iceberg graphic as an analogy to depict the many levels of the patient community. Broadening the criteria will only benefit the tip of the iceberg, the small fraction of patients with lung cancer who happen to be engaged, educated, and empowered, and who are likely to have access to and receive the best treatments, participate in online communities, and join clinical trials. The tip of the iceberg is only 20% of people with lung cancer. The other 80% of people diagnosed with lung cancer are submerged in water because of various disparities that exist. I will walk you through three examples in lung cancer. On the left, you see that in lung cancer trials specifically, the average age of a trial participant was around 61 years old, whereas the median age of diagnosis is 70 years old. Age disparities between trial participants and the incident disease population are pervasive across trials and appear to be increasing over time. On the right, patients with annual household income below $50,000 had 32% lower odds of trial participation than higher income patients. 93% of the respondents were white, suggesting that income is a huge barrier of trial participation, but you must keep in mind that disparities cannot be defined by a single construct of disparity. A 2019 study found Black and Hispanic races are consistently underrepresented in critical FDA approval trials compared with their burden of cancer incidence. The lower panel shows incidence disparity and mortality disparity. As you can see, Asians tend to be overrepresented compared to the disease population, whereas Blacks and Hispanics are underrepresented. But beyond age, income, and ethnicity, the lack of diversity in clinical trials is a vicious cycle, with issues of access leading to issues of the lack of understanding of tumor biology in different populations, which leads to issues of the lack of generalizability to the different populations. The continued absence of including minorities from underserved communities is a scientific, medical, and moral issue that only perpetuates this vicious cycle. This study specifically assesses disparities pertaining to small cell lung cancer in Black populations. In contrast to non-small cell lung cancer, preliminary data suggests that Black individuals may be at a lower risk of developing small cell lung cancer relative to white people. Yet little biological information exists on small cell lung cancer in Black individuals, and there are very few small cell patient-derived models due to the low number of Black participants in clinical trials. How do we end this vicious cycle? One hurdle is to determine and understand what the disparity is in the first place. On this slide, think about the tree as proxy for the system. It is clearly bent to benefit only some populations. Now, it's important to know that equality and equity are not interchangeable. They may sound the same, but implementation of one versus the other can lead to dramatically different outcomes for minorities. Equality means each person has the same resources or opportunities. In this case, the same size ladder. But even with equal support, reaching the fruit remains unequal. Equity means each person receives resources and opportunities based on their individual need. In this case, the exact size ladder needed to reach the fruit, an equal outcome. And justice looks at the system, why it is bent, and then takes the steps to fix it, to straighten the tree. As scientists, healthcare workers, industry, government, and advocates, we must commit to justice. It starts with not losing sight of why clinical trials exist. There are multiple and important stakeholders in both the drug development life cycle and the patient journey, but only patients and caregivers are impacted by every decision made from the beginning and throughout the entire process. Yet patient input, especially from underserved communities, is rarely included from the beginning and throughout the entire process. That must change. We have to reimagine a patient-centric clinical trial ecosystem. There are so many buzzwords flying around like precision oncology, personalized medicine, and patient centricity. But what do they mean and what do they look like in clinical trials? They mean putting the patient's voice at the core of the study design to make sure that research questions are centered around what diverse patients need, not just what researchers want. There needs to be a shift from creating trials for us to creating trials with us. There have been some major efforts in the United States to expand access to clinical trials. In addition to recommending broad eligibility criteria, Congress recently passed the ASCO-backed Clinical Treatment Act, which will require Medicaid to cover routine costs associated with participation in clinical trials. This legislation can help diversify clinical trials and improve research data that will be applicable to a broader population. And a silver lining of COVID-19 is the speed in which the FDA has had to create guidelines that modified trials to be flexible without compromising patient safety or scientific integrity of the trial. But it's not enough, and it doesn't change the fact that most minorities don't participate in trials because they aren't aware of them and they aren't asked. This is a global problem, and there is no one-size-fits-all quick fix. I won't go through this entire slide, but it's an example of multiple barriers to enrolling minorities in clinical trials. But like lung cancer itself, the barriers for each community are also very heterogeneous, complex, and often misunderstood because patients and communities in the real world have unique concerns and needs. I can't speak for those from underserved communities, but I can speak to the power, influence, and importance of partnering with communities and what can be accomplished when the approach is community-based. Collaborating from the beginning with community advocates has proven to have a dramatic effect on accrual and trust. An example of this is the Metastatic Breast Cancer Project, which involved metastatic patient advocates in all aspects from the very beginning. This graph shows the project's initial accrual, which increased dramatically when knowledgeable and respected advocates blogged or posted about the project. Because of this partnership with community advocates, the project enrolled over 5,800 US participants in less than 2 years. For lung cancer specifically, the ISLAC STARS program aims to train, develop, and nurture lung cancer advocates in the science and realities of lung cancer research. Please reach out to ISLAC for help in finding patient research advocates. But even as a lung cancer research advocate myself, I am limited. It would be easy for me to talk about strategies and solutions based on what I think underserved communities need, but making assumptions is dangerous and only relinquishes my responsibility to ask the right questions. We all need to take responsibility and ask questions. And that first question is, who is not at the table? It's great that we are all here, but who is missing? Are diverse patients and communities at the table? COVID-19 has certainly taught us how important it is to engage communities and develop relationships to build trust. So reach out to advocate and local communities. It is critical to engage with patients and communities where they live to better understand concerns and barriers, and involve the community from the beginning, from research and development to commercialization. Only the community knows what would make a trial successful and accessible for their members. Collaborate with community hospitals and minority physicians. Physicians are a trusted voice in the community, and people trust people who are like them. I know there are legitimate concerns about additional costs, but the price of not taking actionable steps is far greater when you put a price on people's lives. Now is the time to transform research. Regulatory policy can provide a framework for broadened eligibility, but diversifying clinical trials requires a change in culture at every level and a change in mindset by everyone. And we have to remember that we don't know what we don't know. We must challenge our assumptions. I guarantee there are many factors that haven't been considered. And partnering with patients and patient groups is critical. You are the experts in science, but we have our PhD in cancer, person with history of disease. We are the experts in the lived experience. And start building those relationships between research community and minority communities. Listen and learn about the people in the community. Value the input and perspectives they bring to the table. And don't forget that underserved communities are defined by multiple constructs. The LGBTQ, elderly, people who live in rural communities, and other groups also face disparities and barriers and need to be represented. Incorporate learnings from COVID-19. It has shown us what's possible, but also that strategies cannot be addressed in a vacuum. There is no one size fits all. Please do what's right, not what's easy. Access to clinical trials can mean the difference between life and death. Promising research data may be practice changing and possibly life saving, but what good is it if the people who are sick can't get the care they need? It's not okay. It's not enough to develop new treatments if they will only benefit the 20% of people diagnosed with lung cancer who have access to and can afford cutting edge care. We need cancer care and treatments that all patients can access. For some patients, clinical trials are often the best treatment. And for some patients, it's the only treatment. But for all patients, clinical trials offer the fundamental human need of hope. And hope represents a chance. Every patient deserves a chance. Thank you.